Hello and welcome to this new episode that we're doing with a very dear person that I really come to treasure during these shows, Deacon Glenn Harmon.
Father.
Thank you for being with us. I'm Father Clem Hazen-Cox here, the chaplain at Familyland Television Network, and we are glad you joined us because we're talking about a new beginning, like the disciples experienced on the road to Emmaus, and for that new beginning and a new life in freedom and happiness, there is one obstacle that most people cannot overcome, and that is unforgiveness. Mm-hmm. Now, we talked a little bit about the whole concept before. Tell us real quick what convinced you in your conversion that forgiveness was needed for a new life.
I reached a point where I sensed a roadblock, a heaviness. My relationship with the Lord was growing. My love of my Catholic faith was growing. I was involved in ministries that I had never been involved in before, but I just sensed that there was a piece of the puzzle that was missing.
Now, for the sake of those viewers that maybe just be joining us right now, why don't you give us a 1-minute synopsis of where you were before you entered into ministry?
Mm-hmm. Very high-level corporate executive for nearly 20 years, vice president of a large corporation. My relationship with God for many years was basically an hour on Sunday. I'd come in on Sunday, I'd say, Lord, I'm going to give you an hour every week, but the rest of the week, you don't bother me, I won't bother you. And that's pretty much my relationship with God. And then in January of 1983, God said, that's over. And He began to really break me, humble me, teach me, make me aware of things. And, you know, I went kicking and screaming.
Like all of us. Yeah.
Absolutely. But then I finally said, okay, I'm going to surrender. And when I did that, God took me to places that I never thought He ever would. I ended up leaving my corporate world and all of the goodies that was about. Sure. And 18 years ago, my wife Linda and I started a Catholic ministry where we travel the country about 40 weeks out of the year. Wow. And we try to help Catholic people fall more deeply in love with our Lord Jesus, our Mother Mary, and also to come into a better understanding of the fullness of the Catholic faith. And it has been a wild ride.
And what's the subject you always focus your missions on, your parish missions?
Ultimately, we start out by looking at roadblocks that prevent us from having that relationship with God. If we don't understand those roadblocks, we don't get very far.
Sure.
Then our missions are 4 days. We then normally move into, and we touched on this briefly, about agape love, unconditional love, the love that God has for us, and we are to share that with others. Sure. And then we move into this whole topic of unforgiveness and forgiveness, and then we end with how do we make it work? And we make it work by faith, understanding what faith really is, and then living it. And faith is simply acting on what we say we believe.
Exactly. And so now if some of you out in the audience maybe still think, well, my life is not that bad, I'm able to manage, so what's all this forgiveness guilt trip you're giving me, you know? I'm not holding on to anything. I mean, I'm not killing anybody, so I got a few little problems with some people. What would you say to them?
I would say they're in denial, for one thing. But I'm going to give you, because I always believe in being real. This whole topic of mercy and unforgiveness, yes, very difficult spiritual topics. And I always try to be very practical, very real, because that's when we can take God and church and connect it. So what I'd like to share with your viewers is how I came face to face in 3 very simple but very powerful ways when I had to look at my life and who I wasn't forgiving. Probably about 10, 12 years ago, we had just finished a mission tour, getting ready to go on another one, and we were home. And so we went to our own Catholic church, our own parish on Sunday. We were never in our own parish. And Mass started, and I'm feeling pretty good about myself, you know. And we come to the part where we say the Lord's Prayer. Now, I'm sure I'm like your viewers. I've said that prayer tens of thousands of times in my life. And sometimes when we have a prayer that well memorized, we're just saying the words.
Sure.
We are not thinking of what they mean. Well, that particular Sunday morning at the 10:30 Mass, God was going to make it abundantly clear, first of all, what I was saying, and second of all, who I was saying it to. And we got to the part in that prayer where it says, Lord, forgive me my trespasses. And in a way I had never experienced it before, Father. I realized at that moment, standing in that pew, I was saying to God, please forgive me for anything and everything I have ever done to hurt you or anyone else. Not in an hour or in a week or a month, but Lord, I'm asking that you forgive me now. But then we know the prayer goes on to say, as I forgive those who have trespassed against me. And again, in a way I had never experienced it. I was saying to God at that moment that I am going to forgive anybody and everybody who has ever done anything to hurt me. Not in an hour, a week, or a month, but now. And as soon as those words came out of my mouth, I could think of 3 or 4 people that had hurt me deeply, and I just flat wasn't going to forgive them. Now, remember where I am. I'm standing in church saying I am with my mouth. I mean, those words were religious and holy and pious words, but God knew my heart. God knew I wasn't going to do it. And that was a profound moment for me when it comes to prayer and forgiveness. So that was the first thing. I began, first of all, to realize I really wasn't completely living what I say I believe. And as a Christian person, as a Catholic Christian person, forgiveness is the root of who we are. It can take us to heights we never thought possible, or it can keep us bound up in ways we never thought we could ever be bound up. The second reason, a number of years ago, I was asked to do an all-day retreat at the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola, Louisiana. There was a movie written and produced many years ago called Dead Man Walking. That's the penitentiary that that whole movie and book was based on. And this was a very unusual retreat for me. I did it for 150 inmates in an interfaith chapel on the prison grounds.
Wow.
And right before we started, the Catholic chaplain pulled me aside. He said, now, Glenn, I know you do a lot of missions, a lot of retreats, but I can tell you something about these guys. They work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, looking, acting, and talking as tough as they can. They are going to make you think that absolutely nothing you're saying is touching them in any way, because if they do, it will be looked upon as a sign of weakness.
Yes.
They'll be taken advantage of later on. So we took a break. I had just given a talk on unforgiveness and forgiveness. You can imagine how that goes over in a place like that. And we were taking a break. I was over by the water fountain in this unique original masterpiece of God. He had to be 6'8", had to weigh at least 400 pounds, and every square inch of his skin that I could see had a tattoo on it. And this guy came right up to me. I mean, his nose was touching my nose. And in a very gruff voice, he said, can you help me with this unforgiveness stuff?
Wow.
And I said, well, can you be more specific? He said, yeah. He said, I need to forgive myself and one other person. I said, okay, can you be even more specific? He said, yeah. I killed the man who killed my wife and daughter. Now, in a split second, up close and real personal, I saw what unforgiveness is capable of doing. Yes. In this case, it took the life of 3 people. They were gone, they'll never come back. And I realized that unforgiveness can be a terminal illness. And I looked at myself, and I'm up there preaching unforgiveness, and there's still people in my life that I was holding on grudges and wouldn't let it go. And I realized it was like a cancer. Little by little, it was eating away at me. So it's as if God was saying to me, Glenn, you're not locked away in a prison for the rest of your life, but in essence, you are in a prison.
Yeah, you put yourself.
Exactly. Nobody put me there, I put myself there. And that brings me to the third reason. I realize that if I hold unforgiveness against anybody in my life, I have placed myself in a prison cell. The handle to that door of that cell is on the inside. And when I forgive, I set myself free. I liberate myself through the grace of God. And when you forgive, you're finally being good to yourself. And see, that was the one, because I used to be a very egocentric, narcissistic person. And when I realized that I was finally being good to myself, that I was setting myself free, it started to make sense to me. God began to show me how I was hurting myself. And I know there are some of your viewers out there that, like you said, may be going through life day to day, may not necessarily be what they would consider to be a terrible life. But if there is any unforgiveness in their hearts right now against anybody, they've put themselves in a prison cell. And I reached a point in my life where I said, I don't want to be locked up anymore. I don't want to be chained up anymore or bound up anymore. I mean, 2,000 years ago, Jesus liberated me, and I was putting myself in this prison cell. So I came face to face with that fact that I needed to do something with this.
And to me, it's so interesting that in my own experience, too, we become no longer free when we are holding grudges. For example, if we're in a workplace and there's one person we really cannot stand, and we have some real issues, and there's resentment, when I see that person, I can no longer smile. I'm no longer free to smile.
Right.
Even if we have no conflict right now, but there's all this baggage I'm stored up in my file cabinet. And I even watched myself at times choose a different way to walk.
Right.
And that was really God convicting me. You know, you think you're free? You're not even free to walk there where the other person's coming, where you're holding that resentment against. Right. You need to choose some kind of an awkward way around. And those are just little examples, and maybe in family too. I don't know whether you have some examples. You know, at times we have the situation where family members living physically very close, maybe in the same town or in the same block, they cannot speak to one another.
Absolutely.
So, what do you?
I have seen people, family members, come to church, brother, sister, they're not even sitting together. Mass is over, they'll walk out of the doors of that church and they will not speak to each other. Now, just think about that. In that time, in church, celebrating the Eucharist, they have gone forward, in essence saying, Jesus, you are my Lord. And they walk out of the doors of the church and they treat somebody like something on the bottom of their shoe. So that is what unforgiveness, there's this major disconnect. Right. And I have seen family members who hadn't spoken to each other in 20, 30, 40 years. When one, it always has to start with one.
Yes.
When one will finally say, enough is enough, and reach out. Yeah. Half the time they don't even remember what they fought about. Exactly. But they dig in. But the healing and the freedom that happens to those two people it's a true miracle. Yeah. But see, Jesus knows what he's talking about.
But what about people, especially for us men? I think it's even harder to admit that we were wrong at times. It's harder. There's something connected to our own identity. It looks like weakness. If I'm going to be the first one to go out to some person that I really have a hard time with and try to extend forgiveness. Now get a little bit more into this whole process of forgiveness and how we can set ourselves up even there, expecting something that forgiveness maybe not really means, namely having to reestablish relationships.
Okay.
You know,
there were, once God brought me to the point where I understood that forgiveness, I always say, for a Christian, forgiveness is a non-negotiable issue. I may be able to sit here with you and give you numerous reasons why I shouldn't forgive this person, but I know that when I stand before God, I can't negotiate my way out of this. He's going to say, Glenn, you remember my word? Do you remember I told you to forgive this person? Why didn't you do it?
Bottom line, Christ did it on the cross.
Absolutely.
I mean, that was...
And the only answer I can ever give to God is, I didn't want to do it. Yeah. And I do not want to stand before God and tell him, I didn't want to do it. So once he got me to the point where I understood the importance of it, then he began to reveal to me roadblocks, obstacles, misunderstandings, misconceptions that I had about this whole topic. And once I began to slowly work through these misunderstandings, it helped me to forgive. The first one was, and I know all of our viewers today, we've all been hurt. Every one of us. It's part of being a human being on this earth. Sure. But many of your viewers have been hurt deeply by other people. And maybe some of them are currently being hurt deeply by other people. I used to think that if somebody hurt me and I forgave them, that by forgiving them, I was saying that what they did was okay. I was validating their actions. And because what they did to me was not okay, and I had connected those two, I would not forgive. That's not what we're saying. When they nailed Jesus to the cross, that was not okay. It wasn't, it never will be okay.
Absolutely.
And when he said, Father, forgive them, he wasn't validating what they were doing to him. He was just saying, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. So if any of you viewers, if any of you have been hurt in any way, physically, emotionally, spiritually by someone, that's not okay. It's evil, it's sinful, it's wrong. But when we forgive, we're doing it because Jesus set the example. He told us to do it. And he said we have to forgive as he forgives. So as soon as I understood that by forgiving, I wasn't validating their actions, that helped. The second thing, you know that phrase you've heard, forgive and forget? I wish I could meet the person that made up that phrase, because they had no clue about forgiveness.
Right.
If somebody has hurt us, we will more than likely never forget it. And I used to actually use this as an excuse. I used to play mind games. Well, when I forget, I'll forgive, knowing I'll never forget, therefore I won't have to forget. I mean, it was the mind games I was playing. We will never forget, but in the, forgiveness and memory loss have nothing to do with each other. We are still required to forgive. So that's the second thing. The third one is, I used to think that if somebody hurt me and I forgave them, that I was immediately required to reestablish a relationship with that person. And because some of the people that had hurt me, I didn't think I should, it stopped me from forgiving. Now, Jesus said forgive, but he didn't say forgive and then go have a cup of coffee with that person.
Right.
We are required to forgive, non-negotiable issue. But then we have to determine, through the grace of God, the wisdom of the Holy Spirit, whether we are to reestablish a relationship with that person. Now, there are some people that God truly wants us to reconcile and reestablish a relationship. But there are other people that we are still required to forgive, but it would not be healthy for them or for me to reestablish a relationship with them. So once I understood that, it was amazing. It was absolutely...
Huge difference, huh?
Oh, it made a huge difference. A perfect example of that, Pope John Paul II. I think it was in May of 1981. He was driving around in his little Pope-mobile, and that man shot him and almost killed him. Spent many weeks in the hospital. But when he got out of the hospital, we all know one of the first places he went was to the prison cell of that man that tried to kill him, sat down right next to that man and forgave him for trying to kill him. That's just a powerful image. But now he didn't look at this guy and say, listen, if you ever get out of prison, why don't you come to the Vatican and we'll do lunch? He knew that he would never have an ongoing relationship with that man. Never wanted it, knew it wasn't in the best interest of either one of them, but he was still required to forgive. And he did it in a powerful, powerful way.
Let me take you back to one of the words that you have mentioned just a minute ago. Reestablishment of relationship and reconciliation, which I think is a natural desire in many of us. Let's say we're dealing with a case where, yes, there have been some resentments, there has been some grudges that were held, but deep down I do want to reestablish the relationship. Now, the other person doesn't want to, doesn't respond to my acts of forgiveness. So is the whole thing useless, or? No,
we cannot control how other people respond to us. We are called by God to forgive. But if in some way you have hurt me, I can't imagine that. But if, let's say...
we're human, so that can happen.
Let's assume you did in some way.
Yeah.
And I come to you and I said, I forgive you for whatever you did. Now, granted, I would love to have you respond and say, well, Glenn, I forgive you too. But you may not do that. You may say, well, I don't care, fly a kite, do whatever you want to do. It may never happen. But my reaching out to you, my forgiving you, is not connected necessarily with you responding.
Yeah.
My forgiving you is being obedient to our Lord Jesus Christ. And it's actually, when I do that, whether you respond or not, I have just liberated myself. I have set myself free.
That's tremendous.
And that's what we have to look at. I have people come to me and they say, Glenn, I have forgiven this person 25 times. Do I have to do it again? And I'll take them back to 70 times 7. Forgiveness is limitless. You know, we don't have to set ourselves up as punching bags. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But we are called to forgive as often as we have to. There's no set amount of time and say, well, I'm done with you then, okay? So that's a really key point. Sure, we'd love to have reciprocation from the other person. We may not get it, or we may not get it at that moment, but by us forgiving them, it might work in their hearts. I've seen forgiveness, just the act of forgiving someone else, change the other person's life.
That might be the starting grace that the other person needs.
Absolutely.
To maybe even dare first, like, go through the process,
Right.
acknowledge to themselves that there is something wrong.
Right.
And then there's also this, we have only a little bit of
Sure.
time left, but forgiving oneself.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to that?
There are people that can forgive anybody else, but they won't forgive themselves. And until we can forgive ourselves, we will never be the person God has called us to be. I will talk to people that have gone into confession, and they'll come out, and I'll be talking, I'll say, do you believe in the depths of your heart that God has forgiven you? Yes. Have you forgiven yourself? No.
Wow.
Then what just happened? In that whole sacrament, what just happened? God forgave you, but you can't forgive yourself. And that's what makes this whole topic so complicated. So maybe in our next series, I have 4 things that have helped me to forgive. Maybe we can get into that.
Yeah, great. Okay. That's great. And I'm so happy. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do, because this is a really important subject, and it will help us to become true followers of Christ and to become free, even psychologically, to be relieved of so many things that bind us. But this forgiveness of self, and if you think about it deep, deep down, if you cannot forgive yourself, you are actually exercising pride. It's a hidden form of pride. I know it's maybe hard to hear, but that's the reality, because if you say that, yes, Lord, you have died for me, and I believe that that was enough for everybody else to be forgiven, but not for me, then you are defaulting on this tremendous grace that God has given to us through the person of Jesus Christ. So thank you for being with us, and we'll see you next time here at Familyland, hopefully. God bless you. Bye-bye.